And the cock crowed. Chapter 2. Dark shadows casting across three great crosses, pointing high up into the gray, troubled sky. Peter saw three men, crucified side by side. His heart sank as his eyes came upon those that he knew, huddled together. Andrew his brother, James and John, and Mary of Magdala. "The Messiah is at center," Mary said, embracing Peter, and she walked away. Her demeanor curious, for she seemed unsettled, but not distraught. Yet she had been most favored by Jesus. Peter walked closer to the cross at center of the three and dropped on his knees. Peering upward, he saw the face of another man. It was not Jesus. Yet above him was inscribed, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Peter attempted to stand, but felt the world about him spinning wildly. He dropped back to the ground, steadied his mind, and began once more to stand. Yet before he had fully arisen, a woman nearby pointed at him and yelled out, "You were his disciple, weren't you?" "I was not," Peter said. He looked around, fearing there were Roman soldiers within hearing. "But you were." "I do not know the man," Peter said. "But I saw you with him. You are his disciple." "Woman, I do not know the man," Peter said, and immediately a cock crowed. A wave of great fear washed across Peter, for the very morning of their last supper before the Passover, Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." But the man was not Jesus. "They have killed him, as our prophets had foretold." Peter looked to see who it was who had spoken. A very old man, bent over from age, steadied by a cane. Peter thought back to yesterday. Jesus and the 12 assembled at table, Jesus chastising him, and Judas for worrying. "Look after your little brother," Jesus had cautioned. Peter had but one thought now: find Judas. Walking the trail back to the house outside the city, taking careful long steps, avoiding the pools of muddy water from recent rains, Peter hurried along, his yesterday's world shattered. Having no experience in which to draw from, events exploding in his face, about to spiral off beyond his grasp. Barely seeing the lush countryside, the fruit and nut trees, the rolling hills, a fine sunny spring day in which he found no pleasure. His mind fixed on the dirty, muddy path leading him over the hill, back to the house. He was hoping that Judas had returned. Coming up over the last hilly crest, he saw a tiny house, alone in a meadow far down, looking like a child's toy abandoned by its owner, not the warm dwelling it had been just days ago. Judas and Jesus and others of the disciples there, laughing and cajoling. The gate, rotten from years of neglect, just a hint of its once radiant white color left as a reminder of its former grand stature, creaked loudly as Peter pushed it open. The dwelling of Simon the leper, it had been given to them to use for Passover while they were at the city. "Judas!" Peter called out. Birds chirped in the trees above. In the distance, a crow cawed. "Judas! Anybody!" Peter called again. He looked about the garden. A squirrel scurried up the walnut tree, then back down. Peter sat down on the old log, the last remnant of a fallen tree left to rot where it had landed some time ago. His eyes fell on the squirrel, eating a nut under the tree, then dashing away. Where was Judas? Where were the others? The old log that Peter sat on felt derelict now, where Judas had given Peter his final warning of this other man, this false Messiah, and a hollow feeling came upon Peter as he looked at the dirt road leading to Jerusalem. For here the three angry travelers, with their notion for mischief, had set in motion Judas' plan. He wondered if he should have handled it differently. Why had Judas run off against the will of both him and Jesus? And what had Judas done? How was this man taken to be Jesus? How had he been so badly misidentified? The inner courtyard seemed peaceful, the sweet fragrance of an assortment of violet and bright crimson flowers, pale rose-colored lilies, almond trees in pure white bloom above, small birds darting between them. The sun was setting behind the hill, and darkness was coming upon the landscape. Peter propped himself against a rock to rest and to contemplate on what had just happened, and he fell asleep. "Peter, it's me. Wake up," a rough voice called softly. Startled, Peter jumped to his feet. Judas reached out his hand and reassuringly placed it on Peter's shoulder. "You know?" Peter asked. "I know everything," Judas said. "Now tell me, where is Jesus and where are the rest?" Looking up at the sky, Peter gauged that he had slept through until early morning and well into the day, for the position of the sun indicated it was going on noontime. "They are not here. I have not seen Jesus. Tell me what you know." Judas said, "Before Passover, Dorcas came into Jerusalem riding a donkey. It was to fulfill the words of the prophets." The prophets? The Messiah coming into the city on a donkey? Yes, to fulfill the prophecy told by Zechariah. "Rejoice, daughter of Zion, your king comes to you and riding on a donkey." Judas waved his arm down low as though greeting this imagined king. "That's mad." But he did. He fulfilled every prophecy wherever he could. He came into the city intending to die, to be arrested and brought before Pilate, to be flogged and crucified. I feared for Jesus. Pilate was not after this deluded impostor. He wanted Jesus. He had become aware of the miracles and how Jesus' reputation was growing. To not just our people, others too, even Romans, all knew of him from the numerous testimonies of the miracles. They saw it themselves. A blind man seen, a leper healed, a man with withered legs walking straight forth. And the chief priest, Caiaphas? His temple authorities had approached me before the Passover. They wanted Jesus. They wanted to talk to him, they said, for Pilate was pressuring that he be arrested. I refused them. But I had already learned of Dorcas' desire to be martyred, and revealed these things to you when we were together at the supper. "How did you know all this?" Peter asked. "I watched Dorcas and his people. I tried to blend in like a follower, and I other times hid in the bushes so I could better hear them. But I learned they had become demoralized, disillusioned, for their master was behaving erratically, speaking of how he must be arrested and treated badly, so to fulfill the words of the prophets. I listened as Dorcas and his innermost disciples argued. He kept saying that it was the will of the Lord, and that with his crucifixion he would fulfill his mission. Some believed him, others didn't. Finally, he retold the prophecy of Isaiah, reciting it nearly word for word. My servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and exalted. His appearance so disfigured that he did not look like a man, and his form did not resemble a human being. So he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths because of him, for they will see what had not been told them. Dorcas went off into the woods to pray, and I came out, revealing myself to his disciples. I told them of Caiaphas, that he wanted the Messiah brought to him. I thought that if this man Dorcas were handed over, then Jesus would be safe. They asked for money in exchange, silver, 30 pieces from the temple. Money? They asked for money in exchange for their master? They were hungry, scavenging whatever they could from the towns, eating whatever they could in the wilderness. But there was a greater reason. It was for fulfilling another of the prophecies of Zechariah. They weighed out for me 30 pieces of silver. Dorcas' people demanded the 30 pieces, believing it a sacrifice to fulfill the will of the Holy One of Israel and bring about their promised salvation. I said it was too much. Caiaphas wouldn't do it. Judas stopped and was quiet, as though he had said all he had to say. And that was it? Yes, that was it. If Jesus had listened, if he had only listened and ran like a thief, like a coward. Judas fell silent, and Peter asked no more questions. They sat for a long while in the garden. Judas broke the silence. After I returned here and warned you, after we told Jesus, I went to Jerusalem and I was given access to Caiaphas, whereupon I offered to lead his authorities to the Messiah if he would not turn him over to Pilate. I did not say Jesus, I said the Messiah. So what happened? Caiaphas agreed, but Dorcas' people had demanded the bounty, and I told Caiaphas the price was 30 pieces of silver. He looked at me in wonderment. It is too much. Why 30 pieces? He said. And I told him it was for fulfilling the prophecy given by Zechariah. He looked at his fellow priests, and he laughed and laughed, and they laughed too. Then he sent a man into the treasury, instructing him to gather up the 30 pieces. He did, and Caiaphas threw a bag at me, containing the silver, and I caught it in my hands. Then he said, "Woe to the worthless idle shepherd who leaves the flock." He too was quoting Zechariah from that same text. Then Caiaphas told me that Pilate was afraid of this man who holds the godlike powers, and that Pilate was pressuring him for his arrest. For the man had seemingly broken no Roman laws, and Pilate could not take him. If this Jewish man confessed to no violation of Roman law, he would not be given over, he said. Temple authorities followed me to Dorcas' camp. He was in a small meadow. I handed his disciples the bag of silver. Dorcas, a detached look, his eyes glazed. He said, "Friend, what brings you here?" They took him and brought him to the temple. He was arrested? He went willingly and was brought before Caiaphas. But immediately Caiaphas saw that he had been handed the wrong man. Yet he did not appear to be so surprised. "So he knew who he was?" Peter asked. "He knew he did not have Jesus, that's all I know. I watched from a distance so that they would not see me." "So what did he do?" "He questioned him for a long time, but Dorcas did not speak. He could not speak, for his disciples had been forewarned that we were coming, and they drugged him before we arrived, before his arrest, to spare him the pain and what would surely come. And I think Caiaphas had intended only to question him and to release him. Except Pilate heard word of his arrest and sent his congratulations to Caiaphas. So then he was afraid to release him for what Pilate might do. So Caiaphas had him questioned more harshly, and Dorcas finally spoke, saying he would come with all power and glory to judge the earth. And this brought a gasp from the people listening, and Caiaphas slapped Dorcas, yelling, "Blasphemy!" and handed him over to Pilate. I had hoped it would not come to that, but Dorcas had said it, and it is what he had wanted. He was taken that very night to Pilate's residence, and there he was treated harshly. The soldiers laughed as they beat him. Then at early morning he was brought before Pilate. "And you saw this? You were there?" A crowd had formed. They had followed him there. I followed, yet stayed at the back and watched too. So Pilate thought that they had brought him Jesus? At first, yes. He asked the man if he were king of the Jews, and as I said, he had been drugged and couldn't easily answer. He stared at Pilate in a stupor, probably only half knowing what was happening. And Pilate kept demanding that he speak. But the other Romans, Pilate's administrators, they began pushing Dorcas. I think they knew he was an impostor. They talked with Pilate for a moment. He became angry and slapped Dorcas. And he grabbed him by the arm and took him before the crowd and said he was releasing him. But he was crucified. I saw him on the cross. It was the crowd. They yelled for his crucifixion. But why? I was there in the crowd. At first, most of the people believed that Pilate had Jesus. Some were weeping, others in lamentation, crying out to God, but others knew it was not Jesus, and it was quickly whispered through the crowd that he did not have Jesus. The crowd was ignited like a thundering lightning, and some began to laugh, and the mood became festive. "What are you saying?" "Pilate is thoroughly hated. You know that. His despicable actions, the injustices, the dishonor he brings upon us, the humiliations, none have ever dared challenge him. When the people learned he was releasing an impostor, they demanded punishment. They wanted to stymie Pilate, to confound his intentions, because he is so hated. So they cried out for execution. The whole crowd did this. But this other man, this Dorcas, he was innocent." "No, not really. He had said blasphemies against God and talked of insurrection against Rome. This he had done. The people didn't much care. They were out to confound Pilate. So what did he do? He saw how unruly the crowd had become, and it made him all the angrier. He took the man back into the palace and demanded that he say who he was. But still he said nothing. So again Pilate tried to release him, but the crowd wouldn't hear of it, and he offered up another man for a crucifixion, Barabbas, a criminal. Yet still the crowd demanded that it be Jesus. But you said they knew it was not Jesus. Yes, that's right. The people knew it was a false Messiah, and Pilate knew that too, but he gauged that he could not release the man who had been identified as Jesus, for he feared Jesus and wanted him dead. How was this other man identified as Jesus? You have forgotten? It was I, Jesus' friend and disciple. I identified the Messiah. They, not I, said he was Jesus. How could you do this? There is no lamenting now. It has happened. Jesus made no such claim. I turned in Dorcas, the Messiah, by his own tongue. And they cried out for Jesus' death, knowing it was not Jesus. I was there, yes, it is what they did. There was dancing and laughing within the crowd. Pilate's hand was being forced over a useless and probably harmless, deluded man. Why didn't he release him anyway? Then it would be recorded that he had released Jesus, the prophet of Israel, who held the real power, the one of whom Rome feared. Pilate would be a defeated man. He could not easily again demand his arrest. What would the high priest say? We gave him over already. Jesus was not a Roman problem, but the Romans were ghastly in fear of him. It is because he has real power, of a kind they cannot comprehend. So it was then that he had this man crucified? Yes, but Pilate washed his hands and said the blood of this man would not be upon him. And he ordered the crime be put above him, King of the Jews. It was the only accusation made that morning. He said he was the King of the Jews. And you have not seen Jesus? Peter asked. I've seen no one, said Judas. Word has gone out among the people already that I turned Jesus in and he was executed on account of me. I cannot show my face in the city. Those who see me curse me. I am hated. Peter shook his head and looked down at the ground, saying nothing for a moment. Better that you lay low for now. Go into the wilderness. I will find the others. Meet up with me here in a week. By then I should know something. Judas nodded, took some belongings, and left. Not until the next morning did Peter see any of the others. First came Jesus, late morning, well after sunrise. He said nothing at first, but Peter felt a deep calm, quite welcome given the overwhelming turmoil he had experienced through the ordeal. Jesus had always done this, turned chaos into calm with just his mere presence. And he continued to say nothing throughout the morning. Unable to bear the silence, Peter broke the quietude. Master, you must tell me what has just transpired. 2 men were crucified yesterday morning, Jesus responded. No, the day before. A man was crucified and was identified as you, Peter said. That morning 3 men were crucified, and each one you denied, Jesus responded. But the man at center, he was identified as you, but his face was of another. Why do you differentiate? Said Jesus. Is not one as precious as the other? Master, Peter said, is such a time as this the time to be giving a lesson? All that you experience are such lessons, Jesus said. Nothing that occurs is without purpose. You say I was crucified, yet I stand here with you in physical form. Who is it who was crucified? I was indeed crucified, as was your brother, sister, father, and mother. Why weep for the man who was not? Understand, and you will live. I spoke to Judas, Peter said. What should I tell him when I see him again? Tell him that he will find his way. He will understand, Jesus said, adding, I will go now and will return in 3 days. Have the 11 here. I will greet you and will give you a new direction. The 11, Peter wondered. He nodded, and the Lord walked off down the road away from the city toward Jericho. Near dusk, John, with his brother James, arrived at the house. Appearing deserted, quiet, not a bird chirping, a cold, empty feeling upon him. In the courtyard was a shadowy figure, sitting on the grass. John! Peter's sharp call was strangely soothing to John's rattled nerves. A familiar voice in a world becoming increasingly strange and void of legitimacy. Peter! James cried. John stood deftly silent, weighing in the chilly emptiness of his surroundings and the crisp, gentle voices of his comrades. Peter continued to sit on the grass in the courtyard, unmoving. What has happened? Where are the others? Said Peter. They are afraid, John said. Afraid of what? Peter asked. We are all afraid, John said. But why? Jesus is unharmed. I saw him today. Astounded by Peter's coolness and seeming innocence and apparent naivety, John sat down facing Peter. You cannot see it? Jesus is fine. You were there. You saw it. It was another man. Yes, but all of Jerusalem believes it was Jesus. This cannot be. The trial was public and many saw him. They knew it was not Jesus. Even Caiaphas knew it, that it was not him. Judas told me. Perhaps so, John said, but few will say it publicly. Who among us would dare challenge Rome? But even Pilate knew it wasn't Jesus. That's ludicrous. He had him crucified, giving the name Jesus of Nazareth. That is how it is written, yes. I see, Peter said. He gazed ahead for a long while, saying nothing. Then he lowered his head and wept. Yes, how it is written, John said. Now what shall we do? Where shall we go? Stay here until Jesus returns. He will give us a new mission. The Romans may come looking for us, James cried. They will not. It is Jesus' instruction. We wait here for his return. Are you sure he is coming? He will be here in 3 days. Those are his very words. Where are the others? I will get them, James said, but I have not seen Judas Iscariot or Thomas. Judas will not be here. There are just 11 now, and Jesus, Peter said. John started to speak, but hesitated, wondering what had happened with Judas. His mind went back to the meal they had had at the house inside the city walls. Judas and Peter acting peculiarly, leaving the group to chat at a distance away from their ears. Peter, is there something we should know? Something you're not telling us? Peter turned his eyes to the side, as though he could not look John in the face. Jesus' closest disciple, showing guilt? What happened? John demanded. His eyes now directed at the ground in front of him, Peter said, "We should best wait for Jesus. We should not worry. That is his instruction. Find the others. Lay low here. Wait for Jesus." "I'll go tell the others," James said. By the third day, all but Thomas had returned, and all were at table when Thomas arrived. "You are all here," Thomas said. He scanned his eyes across the table. The 10 there, seated or standing. "Where is Judas Iscariot?" "He is okay," Peter said. "We are all okay." "With our master's death, we are all okay? You speak like a lunatic." "Jesus, too, is okay," Peter said. "This is madness," Thomas said. "All of Jerusalem knows he was crucified." "It was another man," Peter said, "mistaken as Jesus. Jesus is alive. He is fine." "I don't believe it," Thomas said, shaking his head. Yet all the disciples seated at table stared strangely at Thomas, and he felt a presence behind him. It was Jesus, he knew without looking. Turning to face Jesus, he fell to his knees. "Master, you are here. Are you alive or in the spirit?" Jesus laid his hand on Thomas' shoulder. "Make no distinction between the two. I am alive and in spirit from birth until death. But the Son of God is neither born nor does he die. Peter, tell your brothers what has happened." Peter ran to Thomas and brought him up, guiding him by his arms. Another man was crucified. It was not Jesus. And before the others, he explained to Thomas all that Judas had told him. Jesus came to the foot of the table. He brought his hands out to shoulder height. The Lord has given a special mission to each of us. He turned toward the disciples, looking at the face of each one. Several seated, the others crowded about. "This world is not yet ready for the true message. You here can hardly bear it. A martyr was crucified in my name. He will not bring the new kingdom, yet his fame will spread throughout the earth. Through the glory of another man, mankind will exemplify his own glory, and the truth is destined to escape the sons of man for a time. For this reason, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, and man's suffering will not yet cease. But the foundation has been laid, and a day will come in some future generations when the truth will be revealed, and on that day the kingdom will be manifested. You are the rock upon which I will build my church," Jesus said, looking at Peter. He turned back toward the others. "The Master is no longer with you. Yet have no fear. I am with you always.